Okay, we're continuing with Holy Grail of Wisdom quotes by me, P. Rogers, alphabetical order, Thucydides. Now, Thucydides was an admiral in the Athenian Navy in the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta, and he had failed on a mission of his, so he was exiled for 20 years. He's from a wealthy family, actually from Thrace, so he was seen as, rather than Athens itself, so he was seen as a little bit of an outsider. And his mission was to save Amphipolis, and he failed in 422 BC. And so when he got exiled, he took it as an opportunity to become a historian and write about the war, to observe. So, he didn't have to die, and he got to write about it. And he talked about how Pericles, of course, was the leader of Athens, but Pericles died in the plague. And the reason that Thucydides is so important historically is he's the first writer of history in what we would consider a non-emotional, non-religious, objective, detached way. Sort of scientific history, if you will. Nietzsche described Thucydides as being like the Machiavelli of his time. He was actually very clever, and he would show strong contrasts, like Pericles is giving a speech about how great Athens is. And then pretty soon after that, Thucydides is showing how Athens mistreated the Melians, the people on the island of Melos, and also how they mistreated each other after the plague in Athens. Okay, but it's still a rather magnificent book, and there's some lines from it that I will remember all of my life. And I'll show you what they are here in just a moment. First one, Thucydides says, "Because of my exile, I was enabled to watch quietly the course of events. I have written the history of the Peloponnesian War, not to win the applause of the moment, but as a possession for all time." And that's how the great books are written. The great books are typically written by exiles, ostracized people, outsiders, people in prison, refugees, and they simply say, "I'm going to tell the truth. I don't care if I don't make a goddamn cent for it. I'm going to tell the truth, and it'll be available to everybody for the rest of history." Okay? Edith Hamilton. Thucydides was able to produce a history as coldly impartial as if he had dealt with a far distant past. When you talk about history writing, the Greeks are much more provincial. They only write about their contemporary things that they have experienced and seen themselves. And that's because the Greeks didn't keep public records, whereas the Romans kept public records of many, many things in the course of managing their empire. So a Roman historian could write about, hundreds of years before he lived, okay, versus a Greek historian could only write about their own life. There was Herodotus before them writing about the Persian War, but there weren't that many Greek history books. There was word of mouth passed on by former general strategos like Sophocles and whatnot. But again, there was not that much of a written tradition about history for the ancient Greeks at this time. Okay, and of course Sparta won over Athens, and it was a disaster for Athens. Though luckily they were spared the cruelty that they had imposed on other peoples, like the Melians. Okay. Here's a couple quotes by Thucydides. "A society that separates its scholars from its warriors will have its thinking done by cowards and its fighting done by fools. Brilliant men expect too much of ordinary men." That's a Dunning-Kruger effect. Okay, my history. Okay, we talked about that. "History teaches by example. Most people will not make the effort to find out the truth, and much more are inclined to just accept the first story they hear. Hope is an expensive commodity. It makes better sense to be prepared. When a man finds a conclusion agreeable, he will accept it without argument. But when he finds it disagreeable, he will bring against it all the forces of his logic and reason. It is from the greatest dangers that the greatest glory is to be won. War is a matter not so much of arms, but of money. He is trained best who is trained in the most intense school. Knowledge without understanding is useless. The strong do what they will, and the weak suffer what they must. Thucydides pointed out the cruel hypocrisy of Athens towards the Melians, setting the stage for them deserving to get their butt kicked in Syracuse. So what Thucydides was saying is, look how you abuse the Melian people. You put them to the sword, just because they wouldn't accept your unfair dictum. And then, now you're hoping that you're going to be treated better than the way you treated them. Okay, so he was showing, the hypocrisy of Athens. Okay, Nietzsche said he described Thucydides as the antidote to some of the type of things like Socrates would say or Pericles. Okay, all right. Athenians had said that rights are only matters for equals, and thus when the Melians were weak, they must suffer what they must. The Melians resisted. The Greeks crushed them, put the adult males to death, and the women and children were sold into slavery. And that has been the history of mankind. Now remember, Athens is the greatest of all the ancient societies. There's nothing close to Athens in the ancient societies. And even they behaved this terribly. Okay? They were also harsh to Corinth and the Mytilenaeans. Okay? And it shows me, you start learning about Christianity, you're like, gee, there's a reason for it. Thucydides, the secret of happiness is freedom. The secret of freedom is courage. The best people are found where the rewards for merit are greatest. With freedom, we can eventually restore our financial losses, but with submission, there will be permanent loss of all that we value. You are not safe unless you have men of action on your side. Okay, so that's it for Thucydides, and he's well worth studying. He's one of those people historically, if you want to be well informed, you should study him. You can watch videos about him and learn about him. And I gave you the main point there, but Thucydides is worth knowing. He's one of the most important of the ancient Greeks.